She had set herself to watch, but so far as she could tell no letters passed between them. She believed now that they had used the woodshed on the Lancaster place as a sort of post office. The affair, so far as she knew, had commenced late in June or early in July. Then abruptly she went on to the day of Mrs. Lancaster's murder. Brian was in the garage, she said. He had put on a pair of old overalls, and I was at a window at the back of the house upstairs. I wasn't watching him, she added. I was measuring a window for new curtains. And at 3:30 I saw him, in his overalls, go toward the Lancaster woodshed. I could not see him all the way, of course. The path curves, and you know how the shrubbery has grown. But I was curious and I waited. And he didn't come back until 4:15. She began to cry again, and I saw that she was trembling violently. Look here, I said, haven't you just worked yourself into a state of nerves over all this? Suppose he was near the Lancaster house at that time? How could he get in? And why in heaven's name would he want to get in? It all sounds rather silly to me. It won't sound so silly when I've finished, Louisa, she said with a return of her dignity. I'm not an utter fool. Perhaps I would be a happier woman if I were. I was inclined to agree with her as she went on, for she did go on. What she believed was that for a long time Margaret had been taking gold from the chest under the bed, either with a duplicate key or by securing at night the one from her mother's neck. That she had carried it out of the house, a little at a time, and hidden it, and that all of this was known to Brian Dalton. That it was in effect a part of their plan to run away and live together somewhere, probably in Europe or South America. You see, she said, as though the entire Crescent did not know it, I have the money. Brian has very little of his own. Then, on the day Margaret had telephoned Jim Wellington that her father wanted an audit and to examine the chest, they had both known the game was up. He might have found a note in the woodshed, telling him, she said. And of course there was the axe, right there in plain sight. I know it sounds crazy, but wait, Louisa. How do we know he didn't slip around the house, and Margaret admit him by the front door? I am afraid I shivered, for she said then that she should not have come to me after my own dreadful adventure, but that she was simply desperate. I can't let them hold George Talbot, she wailed. Listen, Mrs. Dalton. Do you think Brian Dalton shot Emily Lancaster, or did this to me last night? Because I don't. God forgive me, Lou. I don't know. Well, I do know, I told her. He never left the house last night. They had 2 men watching it. I remember that she got up then, her face colorless and still twitching. Then they suspect him. What am I to do, Lou? What am I to do? For he's guilty, Lou. He must be, or why did she give him that note last night to burn his overalls? He did burn them, last Thursday night. There was a fire still going out there and they disappeared. What else could he have done with them? I was too stunned to speak. And why, when he heard Emily run out screaming, didn't he go to her? He must have been near enough to hear her. Who could help it? And why did he come into the house from the garage after he took off his overalls and tell Joseph to get him some whiskey? In 30 years I've never known him to take a drink before dinner. I tell you, Louisa, Brian Dalton knew that afternoon that Mrs. Lancaster had been murdered, for all his asking Joseph to tell me that night, as though he had just read it in the newspaper. When he came back into the house that afternoon she had been quietly drinking her iced tea, and he never knew she had seen him. But of course she still knew nothing of the murder. She was still without suspicion that evening, in the library after dinner. He had looked very strange when he called Joseph, however.